Okay, so today I just want to recap a little bit about what we have learned so far, and I will go to my trusty map here. You would notice I have put a map with people who are in the family tree that I shared with you. I hope the family tree is being useful to you, and I hope that if you have any questions that you would ask, I am looking forward to getting your questions. So we're going to start with Louis the 11th. And for some reason, my camera does not reflect exactly on the wall. So I am going to fix that. And so it's just so that you can see the writing on those little sticky paper that I have put up there. So give me 1 minute. Let me just adjust the camera here so that you can see quite clearly. Okay, I think that's it. So we're going to start with Louis the 11th. Louis the 11th, he passed away, and then we had Anne de Beaujeu, who was the regent for her brother, Charles VIII. He was too young when his dad died for him to take the throne. And during the time that Charles VIII was on the throne, Anne de Beaujeu was doing a little bit of education of royal young ladies. And some of the royal young ladies that she took care of were Diane de Poitiers, Margaret of Austria, and Louise of Savoy. These three ladies become important in the rest of the lesson, further down the road. But Louise becomes important very early. Now, when Louise was 11 years old, part of the responsibility of the regent was to arrange marriages. And though they looked for the most lucrative marriage, the one that would help expand the kingdom. So you will see that that theme of marriages and how they affected history right throughout the time of from the time of Francis I to Louis XIV. So you would see how they planned strategic marriages to expand the kingdom and to gain more land. So it was in Anne de Beaujeu's best interest for the Kingdom of France for Louise to marry Charles of Angoulême or Charles of Orleans. He is named Charles both by Charles of Orleans and Charles of Angoulême. When Louise was married to Charles of Angoulême, she had two kids, which was Francis and Marguerite. Okay? Francis and Marguerite, when then Charles of Angoulême passed away, and Louise ended up going back to the palace in Paris to raise her two children. But the next in line for the throne from Charles VIII was Louis the 12th. Right? So Louis the 12th, what did he do? Well, because if Francis's dad, Charles of Angoulême, had not passed away, then Francis would not be the next in line for the throne. So Francis, with Charles of Angoulême passing away, Louise took her children, Francis and Marguerite, back to the palace in Paris to be raised by Louis the 12th. Louis the 12th, because he thought Louise of Savoy was just too young to manage to raise the next in line for the throne. He applied for and he got guardianship of Francis. So Francis became almost like a surrogate, an adopted son of Louis XII. Now, Charles VIII had been married to Anne of Brittany, right? Charles VIII, Anne de Beaujeu made that marriage, strategic marriage for her brother with Anne of Brittany. So when he passes away, Louis XII was married to Anne of Brittany. And we find that now he has Francis under his care, and he also had 2 children with Anne of Brittany, Renee and Claude. And I'm sorry, in the video lesson, I said another Marguerite. So that was a slip up on my part. So, but it's Renee and Claude. So Francis, Renee, and Claude are now being raised with Louis and Anne of Brittany. What happens next? What happens next is that Anne of Brittany dies, and Francis Louis would like to make sure that Francis sits on the throne because he has no other heir. So what does Louis marries off Francis and Claude, right? And so that was what we had learned about Francis's genealogy. That was the first thing we looked at, Francis's genealogy, and where he fit in all of that. Now, when Louis XII died, Francis is now on the throne, and Louis of Savoy is regent for him when it has gone to war. Now remember that Francis is married to Claude. Another player in all of this is Marguerite of Angoulême, who is Francis's sister. So Marguerite grows, she was already older, she helped to take care of Renee and Claude because she was Francis's older sister. In the story about Louis of Savoy, we heard a number of things about the part that Louise played in managing France while Francis was away. But we also heard before that Francis and Marguerite, they got the best of classical humanist education, so that Francis built up the largest library of his time, looking for rare books and special rare manuscripts and books. So he had the largest library, which actually formed the foundation for the Bibliothèque Nationale in France. One of the people that he had in his library was a guy by the name of Guillaume Boudet. So Guillaume Boudet, he was the librarian for Francis. Guillaume Boudet was leaning towards Calvinism because, of course, it wasn't called Calvinism at the time. It was the early days of the Reformation. And Guillaume Boudet, he believed that there were excesses in the Catholic Church. And that was around the cusp of the Reformation, because Martin Luther, Francis took the throne in 1547, but Francis took the throne in 1515, But by 1517 is when Luther wrote his theses. And by 1529, the information that Luther had shared had been spreading all across Europe, and especially in Germany and in France. So it was just the early days of the Reformation, where most of the Catholic clergy and, most of the nobles, Catholic nobles, they believed in excesses of the church, and they were wrestling with changing that. So Guillaume Boudet, because of his extensive research, he believed that the Catholic Church had moved away from its moorings in biblical Christianity. So Guillaume Boudet plays an important part in the life of Louis of Savoy and in with Francis. In the next lesson that you just saw, Margaret of Angoulême, Margaret of Angoulême is where the story begins to unfold, and you actually see God's hand working in what led to the setting up of Canada. So Margaret of Angoulême, she got married to Henry of Navarre. Now I did post for you in your lesson a map of Navarre so that you would see how close Navarre was to France up at the north, and it was close to Spain on the bottom, on the south. So Marguerite of Angoulême, she was Queen of Navarre during the time that Francis was King of France, but she grew up in the courts there, and as a noble, she was still involved in Paris, in the household here. She was very close to Claude and to René. Now, Marguerite and Henry, they had a daughter, Jeanne Dalgray, whom we would look at later. In the next lesson, you will learn about Jeanne Dalgray, and that's a very fascinating story. So Jeanne Dalgray, we would see that her son became Henry III of Navarre, and Henry III of Navarre is the one to watch because he is the one who becomes Henry IV of France, because all of the family line before him, here is Henry, all of the family line that came down from Francis died out. So Henry III of Navarre becomes Henry IV of France. So keep that in mind. Now, also, what I wanted to show you today is the link of the Reformation in the lives of these people. The Reformation came alive with Marguerite of Angoulême, who was not, even though she was not, she didn't claim to be reformed. She was very, very sympathetic to the plight of the reformers who were being persecuted by her brother. So Marguerite interceded many times to Francis for leniency to certain of the reformed-minded guys in that time of history. So Marguerite would intercede with Francis on behalf of some very important Protestants. One of the guys that you heard about was Nicholas Bourbon. Nicholas Bourbon, he was Jeanne Dalgray's teacher. And so he was a friend of Marguerite. He was hired by Francis to tutor Jean. Jean was raised in the palace. She was raised in Paris under Francis's watchful eye, and he made sure she got the best of a classical education also. So she was also influenced by Nicolas Bourbon. Nicolas Bourbon, he actually, you will hear about another reformer called John Calvin. John Calvin was one of the people that Marguerite protected from persecution by harboring him in her country of Navarre. During this time, you will also hear about someone who influenced the Reformation in England. Anne Boleyn was one of Claude's ladies in waiting. Anne Boleyn goes back to England, and she becomes the second wife of Henry VIII. Henry VIII was the one who broke with the Catholic Church because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn, but he was already married to Catherine of Aragon, who was Catherine of Spain. Aragon was Spain. Catherine of Aragon happened to be the sister of, Charles V. So Catherine of Aragon was the sister of Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, enforcing Catholicism throughout Europe and enforcing his will on the people. It was under Charles V that Luther wrote the theses, and it was Charles V who actually gave the edict to have Luther killed because he wouldn't recant. So Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, he was the brother of Catherine of Aragon, or Catherine of Spain. Catherine of Aragon was divorced by Henry VIII so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was Claude's lady-in-waiting, and she rubbed shoulders in the court with Renee and Marguerite of Angoulême and Jean Dalgray. So it gets very interesting to see how the Lord used very different people to accomplish his will. You know, while we were in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, one of our biblical counselors would often use a line that I think is quite appropriate to use here. And she would say, God uses crooked sticks to make straight lines. And I think that was quite, this is quite apt for this part of the program, of the lesson, that you would see that consistently, that God used crooked sticks to make very straight paths. So even though Anne Boleyn, she became the second wife of Henry VIII, who divorced Catherine of Spain so that he could marry her, what came out of that was that Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church and the Church of England was born. So Anne Boleyn further had a daughter called Elizabeth, who became Elizabeth I of England. So it's all very interesting the way the Lord brought these different pieces together to accomplish his will. So Elizabeth I became the ruler of England. Anne Boleyn was murdered, and but Elizabeth I was the daughter of Catherine of Mary, who is called Bloody Mary, Mary Tudor. She was actually the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, so Catherine of Spain. So Mary ruled, and when she died, Elizabeth I came to the throne. So it's all very interesting the way the Lord brought all those people together. Now, what we will also hear about Jeanne Dalgray is that when Marguerite passed away, Jeanne Dalgray protected John Calvin from persecution by harboring him in Navarre on his way out of France. And we will learn about the persecution in about 3 or 4 lessons down. We will hear about the persecution of the French Protestants under Francis, and you will see how John Calvin fits right in with Marguerite of Angoulême, and then with Jeanne Dalgray. Another thing to watch is the role that Renée plays, because Renée of France, Francis marries her off to an Italian prince who became king of Ferrara, a part of Italy that was called Ferrara, and so she becomes Renée of Ferrara, and because of the sympathies that she developed under having these people in her life, Marguerite of Navarre and Jeanne Dalgray, because of their relationship, Renée of Ferrara became a Protestant. And she harbored John Calvin when he was leaving France to go to Geneva. So we will see how all of those things fit together to show God's will in all of that. Some of the other people that you've heard in the story of Marguerite of Angoulême was Marie Gantier. She was a French. She was in Geneva, and she helped John Calvin also. And William Farel, he was also a French reformer who left with Calvin and they left at different times, of course, but they ended up going to Geneva together. Then you will hear also about Clement Monroe. Clement Monroe was a poet who knew Marguerite of Angoulême very well, and during the persecution in France, he joined Calvin in Geneva. And Clement Monroe actually wrote some of the songs, to put the psalms to music for John Calvin. So that is what I want to encourage you with. I want to encourage you to look for God's hand in those things, in the lives of these people, and how He brought so many different people together to accomplish His will. And all of that ends with Henry, the story of Henry III of Navarre, who becomes Henry IV of France, under whom Canada was established.
To learn more about the Christian roots of Canada's history, visit our website at christianrootscanada.org.